Hi there. This is a homily for the 16th Sunday of the year in Ordinary Time. And as you know, I've said this before, during Ordinary Time, we kind of fill out our picture of who God is, what God is doing. And all of that is precisely to help us. If I know what God is doing, I know what I have to be doing. So in these readings, we start with part of the chapter 12 of the Book of Wisdom. And here, wisdom is describing essentially the power of God. And it's interesting that it's connected with, and this is in the very first line, who has the care of all. So this God who has all power is literally caring for us. Now, this power is a source of justice. The fact that you have this power makes you lenient to all. And then when God encounters opposition, when the perfection of your power is disbelieved, in other words, somebody's finding other gods because I don't think this God is quite powerful enough, then you show your might. And in those who know you, you rebuke temerity. And so on, basically coming down to behavior of the person who is being cared for by God. So you teach your people by these deeds. Those who are just must be kind. You give your children good ground for hope, and so forth. So we're filling out this picture of God on the one side and of our life on the other. The psalm picks up this theme of just how amazing God is. God is good and forgiving. Well, you find any human being who can do this consistently. This makes God really exceptional. Abounding in kindness to all who call upon you. Hearken, O Lord, to my prayer. Attend to the sound of my pleading. Very powerful next line. All the nations you have made shall come and worship you, O Lord. And much more in the same vein, because in fact this God who has all power deserves to be worshipped by everyone. In the second reading, you have a piece of Romans 8. And of course, obviously this is New Testament now. And what Paul is doing is talking about how God comes to us in our weakness and aids us in how to pray. And obviously there's a lot more in that, so that the Spirit literally connects us with God, who is so far above us that if the Spirit didn't do that, we would not connect with God. The Gospel then is a series of parables. You have the parable of the wheat and the tares. You have the parable of the kingdom being like a mustard seed. You also have it like the kingdom is like yeast. And all these things are spoken to the crowd, and then the 12 start to ask him questions. Coming back to the parables, the first reading was wisdom speaking to us. Now that's obviously God's wisdom. Here you have God's wisdom incarnate in Jesus Christ, and he is speaking to us again. And what he's doing is using story forms to help us to understand more of what life is like on this earth. And so you have the wheat and the tares growing up together. You have this ending of the parable which says, at harvest time, I will say to the harvesters, obviously collect the weeds and put them aside, and burn them and gather the wheat into my barn. This shows the power of God as judge, and we already had hints of that in the first reading from wisdom. In the second parable, he simply starts, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. So he's telling us about another reality which hasn't been mentioned up to this point. And what it is, it's connected with heaven. It is the kingdom, so obviously God is king. But what is happening is somehow Jesus is teasing us with this understanding that in fact we are actually going to be connected with this kingdom in some way. And it is like the smallest of the seeds that grows into a large bush, and the birds of the sky come and nest in it. And so you're getting a little bit of a picture of a future. We had the picture of the barn as being where we would end up as hopefully the wheat. And then we are having that image expanded so that the barn now is the kingdom of heaven. And then another parable, it's like yeast, and it is put into the flour, and the whole batch of flour is leavened. In other words, it all starts to rise, which is very important when you're making bread. The point being that the kingdom not only is like a tiny, tiny seed that will grow into a great bush, it is also like yeast that literally mixes its way, or gets mixed right the way through life, and elevates that life, transforms it into potentially at least the kingdom of heaven. Because we've already been warned that there are people who are not going to make it to the kingdom of heaven. Those are the ones represented by the tares. Jesus then explains the parable and essentially puts into just different language what these parables are doing. But essentially what he's showing us is that from the Old Testament to the New, the wisdom of God speaks. In the Old Testament, it is the wisdom, capital W. In the New Testament, it is the Word, capital W, and it is the Word who becomes flesh and lives with us, dies, rises, and is glorified. The whole point being that God is working with us. We are not alone. Have a good day.